The gunshot was so loud it cracked the walls. A man screamed, "No, no, no, please you promise me." Another voice cut through him cold and flat. You should never have said his name. Then the second shot came. There was no going back after that. It was 2 minutes past midnight on Friday, April 24th, 1965, in Harlem, New York. The air was thick with rain and gunpowder, and Bumpy Johnson was about to walk into a situation that would change everything. By the end of this story, the city would never be the same. The man bleeding out on the apartment floor had been Bumpy's best friend, not an associate, not a soldier, not someone from the street. His best friend, the kind of man who knew where Bumpy slept, where his family hid, where the bodies were buried, and where the secrets were still breathing. And now that man was choking on his own blood, eyes wide with terror, reaching for a phone that would never be answered. Outside, sirens screamed past the building. They did not stop. They never stopped in Harlem. That was the first injustice. The kind everyone was used to, the kind that trained people not to hope. A neighbor had called the police the moment the first shot rang out. They logged the call. They wrote it down. They did nothing because this was Harlem, and Harlem was allowed to bleed. Bumpy Johnson did not know any of this yet. He was walking down 135th Street, coat collar turned up against the rain, shoes steady, pace unhurried. Anyone watching would have thought he was calm. That was always a mistake. Bumpy was not calm. He was controlled. There is a difference. Every step he took was measured. Every breath counted. His mind moved faster than the city around him, running through patterns, risks, faces. Something felt wrong. Not danger, not fear, absence. The kind you feel when someone who is always there suddenly is not. He stopped under a flickering streetlight, looked at his watch. Midnight had passed. He was late, and the man who was never late was not answering his phone. Inside the apartment, the killer wiped his hands on a towel and spoke quietly into the receiver. "It's done. He knows now." A pause. "Yeah, tonight." Then softer. "Make sure the police stay away." The line went dead. That was the second injustice. The betrayal was not just personal. It was sanctioned. Bumpy reached the building moments later. The door was unlocked. That alone told him everything. He climbed the stairs without a sound. Second floor, third floor. The smell hit him before the sight. Blood as a smell. Metallic. Heavy. Impossible to forget once you learn it. The apartment door was open. Inside, his best friend lay twisted on the floor, eyes glassy, mouth open like he was still trying to explain himself. Bumpy knelt slowly, touched the man's shoulder. Cold, for a long moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, to no one, "You should have told me." That was the moment of no return, because on the table, next to the body, was a folded piece of paper. Names, times, locations, and one name circled in thick black ink. Bumpy's. This was not a robbery. This was not a heat of the moment killing. This was a message. Someone had decided that Bumpy Johnson was finished, and they had chosen the one man close enough to get him killed without firing the shot themselves. The rage came later. First came clarity. Bumpy stood and looked around the room. No signs of struggle. No overturned furniture, which meant his friend had let them in, trusted them, or believed a lie. Bumpy closed his eyes for just 1 second. Outside, the rain came down harder. Across Harlem, doors locked. Lights went out. People felt it before they understood it. Something had shifted. The streets went quiet in a way they never did, because betrayal travels faster than bullets. And everyone knew who had just been marked. Within minutes, word began to spread, not through phones, through whispers, through looks exchanged on stoops and in hallways. Bumpy's friend was dead. and the police were nowhere to be found. That meant only one thing. The system had picked a side, and it was not Harlem. This was how injustice worked. It did not announce itself. It aligned quietly. Corrupt cops, paid informants, paperwork that vanished, calls that went unanswered. The city did not need to kill Bumpy Johnson themselves. They just needed to remove the rules. Let the streets do the rest. Bumpy walked back into the rain. He did not run. He did not hide. His face was calm, but his eyes had changed. The kind of change men around him had learned to fear. He knew now the betrayal was complete. The trap was set, and the clock had started. Less than one day. That was all year before Harlem would be flooded with badges, bullets, and lies. Before everyone he protected would be used against him. Before his name would either become a warning or a legacy. Somewhere in the city, the man who ordered the betrayal smiled and said, "By tomorrow, this will all be over." He was half right, because in the next 24 hours, Harlem would choose. And once it did, nothing would ever be the same again. By 12:30 in the morning, Harlem already knew. Not the details, not the names, just the feeling. That tight pull in the chest. That quiet shutting of doors. That look people gave each other when something bad had happened, and no one wanted to say it out loud. Bumpy Johnson moved through it all like a ghost. He did not speak. He did not ask questions. Because when betrayal is this close, questions get people killed. He walked 3 blocks west, rain soaking through his coat, until he reached a barber shop that was supposed to be closed. The lights inside were off. The door open anyway. Inside, 5 men looked up at once. Nobody reached for a weapon. Nobody smiled. That silence was respect. One of them finally spoke. "They got him." Bumpy nodded once. "I know." Another man swallowed hard. Police rolled past twice already. Slow. That was not patrol. That was pressure. Bumpy took off his coat and draped it over a chair. Water pooled on the floor. "Who knows?" he asked. "Everybody." And nobody. That answer meant trouble. This was how power shifted. Not with speeches. Not with gunfire. With uncertainty. Bumpy leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes half closed like he was thinking about something else entirely. But inside, his mind was cutting paths through chaos. His best friend was dead. The police were complicit. Someone high enough had signed off, which meant this was not about territory. It was about removal. They wanted him gone, and they were willing to burn Harlem to do it. Outside, squad cars crawled the avenue. Officers stared into windows, knocked on random doors, stopped men for no reason at all. That was the injustice engine warming up. Make the neighborhood uncomfortable enough, and someone always breaks. Especially when the man they were looking for refused to hide. Bumpy straightened. "Nobody moves unless I say." He told the room. A younger man hesitated. "What about your family?" Bumpy did not raise his voice. "Nobody touches them. Not tonight." "How you know?" "Because if they do," he said quietly, "this city will never forgive them." That was not a threat. It was a fact. He stepped back into the rain. 2 blocks later, a woman grabbed his arm from a doorway. "You need to leave," she whispered. They asking questions. He looked at her. Really looked. She had 2 kids behind her, eyes wide, scared. "I ain't going nowhere," he said. She shook her head. "They don't care who they hurt." Bumpy crouched, so he was level with the children. "Go inside. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone." The woman hesitated. "What about you?" He stood. "I am the reason they hear." That was the difference between fear and responsibility. By 1:15 in the morning, the phone started working again. Not official lines. Private ones. Men who had avoided Bumpy for months suddenly wanted to talk. That told him even more. Someone was spreading money, buying silence, buying loyalty, buying time. Bumpy listened. He always listened. Then he ended the calls. Trust, he knew, was a loaded gun, and someone had just pulled the trigger on him. He changed locations twice in 30 minutes. Always walking, always visible. That was strategy. If they were watching, he wanted them nervous. At one corner, a patrol car slowed. The officer inside stared hard. Bumpy stared back. The car drove on. They were not ready yet. That meant the order had not come down, which meant the betrayer was still talking, still negotiating, still alive. At 2 o'clock, Bumpy ducked into a church basement. No lights, just a single candle burning near the altar. An old man sat there alone. You should not be here tonight, the man said. Neither should you. The old man smiled sadly. They always come to churches when they scared. Bumpy sat on a pew. I am not scared. No, the man said. You angry. That was closer. Word filtered in, piece by piece. The man who sold him out was not running. He was protected, moved between safe houses, escorted. That meant law enforcement was not just involved. They were invested. And that made this something else entirely. This was no longer about crime. This was about control. By 3 in the morning, Harlem was holding its breath. No shots, no raids, just pressure. Bumpy stood under a streetlight again, same one as before, rain easing now. He thought of his friend, the laughs they shared, the trust, the secrets. Betrayal does not start with hate. It starts with fear. And someone had convinced his closest ally that survival meant selling his soul. A car pulled up slow. Window cracked. A voice he recognized said, "You got until morning." Bumpy stepped closer. For what? To disappear. And if I don't? The voice paused. Then everybody you love gonna pay. The car drove off. That was the line. They had crossed it. Bumpy did not shout, did not chase. He simply nodded to himself. Morning was still hours away, and they had just told him everything he needed to know. Because when power threatens families, it means it is afraid. Somewhere across the city, the betrayer sat in a guarded apartment, drinking whiskey, telling himself he had done the right thing, that this was survival, that Bumpy would understand. But deep down he knew, once trust is broken, there is no hiding place big enough, and the man he betrayed had not yet made his move. By the time the sun even thought about rising, the streets of Harlem would belong to someone else. The only question was who. By 4 o'clock in the morning, Harlem felt occupied, not officially, not on paper, but everyone could feel it. Police cars idled on corners where they never parked before. Plainclothes officers leaned against buildings pretending not to watch. Men were stopped for no reason. Women were questioned about people they did not know. This was not law enforcement. This was intimidation. And it was aimed at one man, Bumpy Johnson. The first arrest happened before dawn. A young man named Isaiah. No record. Worked nights loading trucks. They grabbed him outside his building, slammed him against a car, and told him they knew he talked to Bumpy. He had not. That did not matter. They took him anyway. That was how the city turned its back. Not with one big betrayal, but with 100 small ones that stacked until there was no room left to breathe. Bumpy heard about Isaiah from a woman cry on a stoop. "They took my boy," she said. "They said it was because of you." Bumpy stopped walking, knelt in front of her. He did not make excuses. He did not promise miracles. "I will bring him home," he said. Her hands shook. "They never bring them home." Bumpy looked past her, at the police car, then at the block. "Then I will." This was the moral line. The city had decided that punishing the innocent was acceptable if it broke the powerful. But Bumpy had never claimed power for himself. He claimed responsibility, and responsibility does not run. By 6 in the morning, 3 more people were taken. No charges, no paperwork, just names written down somewhere they would never see. The injustice was no longer quiet. It was loud, deliberate, and designed to make Harlem hate the man they once trusted. That was the strategy. Turn the people against their protector. Bumpy changed direction and walked straight toward a police station. Not the front door, the side entrance. 2 officers stepped forward. "You lost," one of them said. Bumpy smiled faintly. "I am still standing." The smile vanished from the officer's face. "You think this neighborhood gonna save you? I know they will. You think wrong." Bumpy leaned closer. "Then you don't know Harlem." Inside the station, phones rang unanswered. Paperwork piled up. A captain watched from behind glass, expression unreadable. This was bigger than street cops. Orders had come down. Hands were tied or paid. By mid-morning, food delivery stopped. Vendors were told to move along. Church kitchens were inspected for violations that never mattered before. Pressure, always pressure. An old man muttered as Bumpy passed him. "They starving us to flush you out." Bumpy nodded. "They starving themselves." The man did not understand yet, but he would. At 11 o'clock, the betrayal sharpened. A runner arrived breathless. "They protecting him," he said. "Your friend." "Where?" "Downtown. Safe building. Police out front." Bumpy closed his eyes. That was confirmation. The system had chosen its witness, and it would burn Harlem to keep him breathing. This was the part that hurt the most. Not the death, not the threat, but the realization that the law was never meant to protect them, only to manage them. And when management failed, punishment followed. A group of men gathered around Bumpy. "We can hit back," one said. Now another added. Bumpy shook his head. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because that is what they want." A pause. "They want us angry and loud, so they can call it justice when they crush us." Silence followed. They had never heard it put that way. Just after noon, a woman approached with tears streaking her face. "They say you told them my husband runs numbers." Bumpy stiffened. "I did not." "I know," she said, "but they don't care." That was the point. Truth had become irrelevant. Fear was a currency now. By early afternoon, Harlem was split. Some people hid. Some whispered. Some wondered if protecting Bumpy was worth the cost. That doubt was poison, and the city kept pouring it. At 2:30, a radio crackled with news. An official statement. Police claimed a dangerous criminal network was under investigation. Names were not mentioned. Everyone knew who they meant. This was the beginning of the public story. And public stories erased people quietly. Bumpy stood on a rooftop and looked out over the neighborhood. Children playing between buildings, women hanging laundry, men watching corners. All of it fragile, all of it targeted. This was bigger than him now. That realization settled heavy. A final message arrived just before 3. Written, delivered by hand. "If Bumpy does not surrender by dawn, arrests will continue. Families will suffer." This was the ultimatum. This was the abuse of power made plain. Bumpy folded the paper slowly. Around him, the city waited. For his surrender, for his retaliation, for his mistake. What they did not understand was that he was no longer reacting. He was deciding. And once Bumpy Johnson decided, the consequences always rippled outward. Somewhere downtown, the betrayer heard about the arrest and felt a flicker of relief. "They are doing it," he told himself. "They are protecting me." He did not see the other truth yet, that when institutions reveal their cruelty, they also reveal their weakness. and Harlem was watching. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, Bumpy stepped off the roof and into the street. He had less than 12 hours left, and the city had made its move. Now it was his turn. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the clock was no longer symbolic. It was literal. Every decision from this moment forward carried a timestamp. Every delay had a cost. Every mistake would be paid for by someone who did not deserve it. At 4:15, Bumpy Johnson crossed Lenox Avenue without slowing down. Two unmarked cars rolled past him. Neither stopped. That told him everything. They were watching, tracking, waiting. You do not hunt what you believe is already trapped. At 4:30, he reached the basement beneath a closed grocery store. The owner unlocked the door without a word. Inside, 6 people waited. None of them spoke first. That was respect earned, not demanded. They had all heard the ultimatum. Surrender by dawn, or Harlem bleeds. At 4:45, Bumpy broke the silence. They want me to disappear, he said. One man shook his head. They want you to kneel. Same thing. Another voice rose. You could leave. Tonight. Bumpy looked at him, and then he asked a question instead of giving an answer. Who do they take next if I go? Nobody answered. That was the answer. At 5 o'clock, a police convoy rolled down 125th Street. Lights off, sirens silent. That was not normal. That was intimidation done quietly. Store owners closed early. Parents pulled children inside. Harlem was shrinking, and the walls were moving. At 5:20, Bumpy sent a message. Not by phone, by presence. He walked straight into a crowded block, stood under an open sky, and lit a cigarette. No cover, no protection. If they wanted him, they could have him, but only on his terms. People noticed. Windows opened. Eyes followed him. That mattered. At 5:40, a man approached fast. Too fast. Bumpy did not flinch. The man whispered. They got warrants now. Blank ones. Bumpy nodded. That meant names could be filled in later. That meant anyone could be guilty. That was institutional failure dressed as law. At 6 o'clock, the first raid of the evening hit. Not Bumpy's location. A random apartment 4 blocks away. A woman screamed. Furniture shattered. A child cried. And Bumpy heard from the sidewalk. His jaw tightened. This was not collateral damage. This was strategy. Make him feel every consequence personally. At 6:20, Bumpy moved again. Alleyways, fire escapes, back doors open before he knocked. No one asked why. They already knew. This was the unspoken agreement between him and Harlem. He stood when others hid, and now they hid him. At 7 o'clock, the sun disappeared. Streetlights flickered on. The city changed character. Night made everything sharper. Danger closer. Truth harder to see. At 7:15, another message arrived. Verbal. Delivered by someone shaking. Your friend wants to talk. Alone. No police. Bumpy did not respond immediately. He stared at the wall. The betrayal was not finished. It was evolving. At 7:30, someone spoke what everyone was thinking. It's a trap. Bumpy nodded. Of course it is. Then why go? Because traps work both ways. Silence followed. Heavy. Uneasy. At 8 o'clock, a second wave of arrests. A preacher. A barber. A teenager with no connection at all. The injustice was no longer subtle. It was screaming, and Harlem was listening. At 8:20, Bumpy stood on a fire escape and watched patrol cars block off a street. He memorized positions, angles, timing. This was not panic. This was preparation. At 9 o'clock, rain returned. Harder than before. Streets emptied. Sirens echoed. Somewhere downtown, paperwork was being stamped. Orders finalized. The machine was fully awake now. At 9:30, Bumpy made his decision. He would take the meeting, not because he trusted the man, but because time was bleeding away, and because whatever happened in that room would decide what Harlem woke up to. At 10 o'clock, he changed clothes. Simple, clean, no weapons visible. That was deliberate. Fear looks for excuses. He would give them none. At 10:20, a woman stopped him in the hallway. "You still have time to run," she said. Bumpy smiled gently. "No," he said, "I have time to finish something." At 11 o'clock, the city held its breath. Police radios crackled nonstop. Unmarked cars repositioned. Everyone important was awake now, waiting for morning, waiting for blood. At 11:30, Bumpy stepped into the night. Alone, the meeting location waited somewhere ahead. So did the man who sold him out. So did the truth that would break one of them. Midnight was coming, and with it, the most dangerous hour of his life. Midnight arrived without ceremony. No bells, no warning, just a shift in the air. The rain stopped all at once, like the city itself was holding its breath. At 12 o'clock exactly, Bumpy Johnson stepped through the door of a borrowed apartment on the edge of Harlem. 4th floor, no elevator, one light bulb buzzing overhead. The room smelled like old smoke and nervous sweat. One table, 2 chairs, and one man already waiting. They stared at each other for a long moment. No greetings, no insults, just the weight of years pressing down between them. The betrayer looked smaller than Bumpy remembered, not weaker, just reduced. He spoke first, voice unsteady. "You shouldn't have come." Bumpy closed the door behind him. "You asked for me. I didn't think you'd actually show." Bumpy pulled out a chair and sat. "You never did know me that well." Silence stretched. The man across from him rubbed his hands together. "You don't understand what they were going to do." Bumpy tilted his head. "Try me. They said either I talk or everybody goes down. You, me, families, kids." Bumpy leaned back. "And you believe them." The man swallowed. "They show me papers. Warrants. Orders." Bumpy nodded slowly. "They always do." The room felt smaller now, like the walls were inching closer. "I didn't want it to be like this." The man said, "I was trying to survive." Bumpy looked him straight in the eyes. "Survival without honor is just a longer death." That landed hard. The man flinched. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" he snapped. Bumpy did not raise his voice. "No." "Then what?" "I think you were afraid." That was worse than anger, because it was true. The betrayer stood up suddenly. "They promised me protection. A new start. I get to walk away." Bumpy remained seated. "No, they promised you time." The man froze. "What?" "They don't protect people like us. They use us until we empty. Then they bury us quiet." The man shook his head. "No, no, you're wrong." Bumpy leaned forward now. "You already dead. You just don't know the hour." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. The man sat back down, hands trembling. "They said you wouldn't forgive me." Bumpy exhaled slowly. Forgiveness was never part of this. "Then what is?" "Truth." Bumpy reached into his coat and placed a folded paper on the table. Names, times, locations, the same list that had been left next to body. The man stared at it. "How?" "Because you were not the only one talking." The man's face drained the color. "They played you, just like they played him." The room began to shake, not from an explosion, from a man realizing he had destroyed everything for nothing. "They told me you were reckless, that you didn't care who got hurt." Bumpy stood. Look outside. The man did. Police lights washed the walls in red and blue. Hear that? Sirens. Shouting. A city under siege. That's what not caring looks like. Tears spilled now. I didn't want them to take my wife. Bumpy closed the distance between them. And now they will, because you gave them permission. The man collapsed inward. You gonna kill me? Bumpy paused. That was the moment, the emotional peak, the place where rage begged to be obeyed. But Bumpy had never been ruled by impulse. No, he said. That confused him. Then what? Bumpy leaned down and spoke softly. You already killed yourself. I'm just gonna let Harlem see it. A knock at the door. Hard. Police. The man looked up in panic. You said no police. Bumpy stepped back. I didn't call them. That was the truth, which made it worse. The knock came again. Open up. The betrayers scrambled. They said they'd protect me. Bumpy watched them unravel. They always lie last. As the door splintered inward, Bumpy moved toward the fire escape. The man screamed. Wait. Bumpy stopped. Look back. You had one job. You broke it. Then he was gone. Police flooded the room. The betrayer was dragged out, kicking, screaming names that would soon disappear from records. Down on the street, cameras flashed. Witnesses watched. Harlem watched. The truth was no longer hidden. By the time Bumpy disappeared into the night, the city had changed. The betrayal was exposed. The illusion of protection was shattered. And the war had crossed a line it could never step back over. Because once a system shows its face, it cannot pretend again. Before dawn, Harlem would choose its side. And the people in power had no idea what they had just unleashed. By 12:30 in the morning, the story was already changing. Not the official one. Not the one that would be typed up by morning and read on the radio with careful words and missing names. The real one. The one that moved mouth to ear. Window to window. Church steps to bar stools. Bumpy Johnson had walked into the trap. And he had walked out. At 12:45, police cars screamed away from the apartment where the betrayal collapsed. Lights on now. Sirens loud. Too loud. That was panic, not procedure. People leaned out of windows. They saw the man who had been protected dragged into the open like a secret that could not stay hidden anymore. Hands cuffed, face twisted, mouth running. And something important happened in that moment. No one looked away. By 1 o'clock, Harlem was awake. Not fully, not openly, but aware. The lie had cracked. The man the police said they were protecting had been exposed as a tool. And the man they were hunting had just proven he could not be erased quietly. Bumpy Johnson moved through alleys and rooftops, never stopping for more than a breath. He could feel it. The shift. People who would not meet his eyes earlier now nodded once as he passed. Doors opened without a knock. Lights flicked on and off as signals. Harlem was choosing. At 1:20, a patrol car rolled up fast. Too fast. Bumpy ducked into a hallway. A woman stepped out immediately, blocking the entrance. Can I help you, officers? They looked past her. We got a report. She did not move. You got the wrong building. They hesitated, then drove off. She did not look back at Bumpy. She did not need to. That was a choice being made in real time. At 1:45, another arrest was supposed to happen. It did not. The address was wrong. The door was locked. Nobody answered. Paperwork meant nothing without cooperation. And cooperation was drying up. At 2 o'clock, the city pushed back. Quietly, a witness forgot what he saw. A phone went unanswered. A tip never arrived. This was not loyalty. This was survival learned the hard way. Police pressure intensified. Batons out. Voices raised. But every heavy step was met with stillness. And stillness is dangerous. You cannot fight what you cannot see move. At 2:30, Bumpy stopped in a tenement stairwell and leaned against the wall. For the first time that night, he allowed himself to breathe, not relief, calculation. The betrayal had failed in its final purpose. Harlem had not turned on him. It had turned inward, closed ranks. That was something no badge could order away. A young man approached, eyes wide. They saying they coming hard before sunrise. Bumpy nodded. I know what you're gonna do. Bumpy looked past him toward the sleeping city. Nothing they expect. At 3 o'clock, a police captain slammed a desk somewhere downtown. Informants were drying up. Timelines were slipping. The machine was losing control. That is when institutions become violent, not out of justice, out of fear. At 3:15, the first unplanned beating happened. A man who refused to answer questions. Blood on the pavement. Witnesses everywhere. Statements nowhere. That brutality was meant as a warning. Instead, it was fuel. Bumpy watched from a shadowed doorway as the man was helped up by neighbors. No anger in their movements. Just resolve. This is what they never understand, Bumpy thought. Fear stops working when there is nothing left to lose. At 3:45, word spread fast. No one was talking. Not tonight. Not anymore. Harlem had learned something irreversible. Protection did not come from the law. It came from each other. At 4 o'clock, the eastern sky began to lighten. Dawn was coming. So it was a final move. Bumpy knew the next hours would decide everything. Victory would not look like celebration. It would look like endurance. He stepped into the street, visible again. If they wanted him, they would have to take him in daylight, in front of everyone. That was the line he was drawing now. And lines drawn in public are harder to erase. Somewhere in custody, the betrayer sat alone, realizing protection he was promised had already vanished. No lawyer yet. No friendly faces. Just a man learning too late that systems do not love you back. As dawn crept closer, Harlem stood silent, not asleep, ready, and in that silence was a message louder than any gunshot. This time, the city had chosen its own, and the longest night was not over yet. 4:30 in the morning arrived like a hell breath finally released. The sky over Harlem was no longer black. It was bruised, purple, gray, heavy with what was coming. This was the hour when mistakes happened. This was the hour when men decided whether they were going to live with themselves or not. At 4:35, Bumpy Johnson stood beneath a fire escape and listened. Sirens, boots on pavement, radios chirping with nervous energy. The machine was moving again. Not clean, not confident, desperate. At 4:40, the first sweep began. Not targeted, wide. Police flooded blocks at once, knocking doors down, dragging men into the street half-dressed, shouting orders no one could follow fast enough. This was no longer about Bumpy. This was punishment. Bumpy moved with the rhythm of it, never ahead of the wave, never behind it. He passed through hallways just as officers passed the other end of the building. Fire escape ladders rattled as he climbed. A door opened at the exact second he reached it. No words exchanged, just a nod, just understanding. At 4:55, a boy no older than 12 froze in an alley as officers turned the corner. Bumpy saw it happen in real time. The boy panicked, dropped what he was holding, put his hands up too late. A baton came down. Once, twice. Bumpy stepped out of the shadows. Enough. The officer spun. Who the hell are you? Bumpy did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply stood between them. Leave him. The officer hesitated. Something in Bumpy's face stopped him. They moved on. The boy stared up, shaking. Go home, Bumpy said quietly. And don't look back. The boy ran. That moment would matter later. At 5:10, word reached Bumpy through 3 different mouths. They planning to grab you in daylight. Make an example. Bumpy nodded. Good. They would not drag him into darkness like a secret. If they wanted him, they would do it where everyone could see the cost. At 5:25, rain started again. Light at first, then steady, the kind that soaks without asking permission. Harlem smelled like wet concrete and iron, like a city that had been hit too many times and refused to stay down. At 5:40, an unmarked car skidded to a stop too close. Doors flew open. Bumpy ran, not in panic, in calculation. He cut left, then right, then disappeared through a building that should have been locked. It was not. Behind him, shouting. Ahead of him, silence. At 5:55, he crouched in the stairwell, chest rising slow. For the first time since this began, he felt the edge of exhaustion, not weakness. Wait, the weight of knowing that every choice now echoed far beyond him. At 6 o'clock, the sun crested the rooftops. Daylight. Everything looked different. Police aggression became more controlled. Cameras appeared. Words like protocol and procedure floated back into the air. The night was over, but the reckoning was not. At 6:15, Bumpy stepped out onto the sidewalk. Visible, unarmed. People saw him. Some froze. Some nodded. Some turned their backs, afraid to be seen. All of that was human. All of that was allowed. At 6:30, a line of patrol cars blocked the street ahead. An officer raised a hand. That's far enough. Bumpy stopped. People gathered without realizing they were doing it. Windows opened. Someone whispered his name. At 6:40, a senior officer approached. This doesn't have to be ugly, he said. Bumpy looked around. At the neighbors, the children, the old men leaning on canes. It's already ugly. You coming with us? On what charge? The officer hesitated. That hesitation said everything. At 6:55, a shout came from the crowd. Let him be. Then another. Then another. No chance. No chaos. Just voices refusing to disappear. The officers shifted. They were not trained for this. At 7 o'clock, Bumpy raised his hands. Not in surrender. In acknowledgement. He turned slightly so the people could hear him. Whatever happens next, he said, remember this. They didn't come for me because I was dangerous. They came because I stood in their way. Silence followed. Heavy. Honest. The officer stepped forward again. You done. Bumpy nodded. For now. He took one step. Then another. Toward the line. Toward the outcome. Toward whatever the city would become next. Behind him, Harlem did not scatter. It stood. And in that moment, everyone watching understood something that could never be unlearned. Power only looks permanent until people stop believing in it. The longest night had ended, but the consequences were just beginning. 7:15 in the morning did not feel like morning. It felt like aftermath. The street where Bumpy Johnson stood was frozen in a moment that no one had planned for and no one could undo. Police radios crackled with overlapping voices. Orders contradicted each other. No one wanted to be the one who made the wrong move in front of witnesses. That hesitation was new, and it was everything. At 7:20, a supervisor arrived. Suit, tie, eyes that measured risk instead of justice. He looked at the crowd first, then at Bumpy, then at the officers who had lost control of the narrative. Take him in quiet, he said. Bumpy smiled faintly. There's no quiet left. The supervisor ignored him and turned to the crowd. This is an active police matter. Please disperse. No one moved. A woman crossed her arms. An old man shook his head slowly. A child climbed onto a stoop, for a better look. This was not a riot. This was refusal. At 7:35, a reporter appeared at the edge of the block. Then another. Cameras changed hands. Notepads opened. This was the crack in the wall the system feared most. Visibility. At 7:40, the first official mistake was made. An officer tried to shove a man out of the crowd. The man stumbled but did not fall, and 10 hands reached out to steady him. That image mattered, because it told the truth in a way words never could. Bumpy spoke again, calmly. "You don't have to do this." The supervisor scoffed. "This ends today." Bumpy nodded. "Yes, it does. They just disagreed on how." At 7:55, downtown phones began ringing. Too many witnesses. Too much attention. The witness they were protecting was already talking to lawyers. The machine was choking on its own weight. By 8 o'clock, the story changed. No longer a dangerous manhunt. Now it was an investigation. Language softened. Edges blurred. That was how retreats happened without admitting defeat. At 8:10, the order came down. Stand down. Not because it was right, because it was safer. Police lines loosened. Cars pulled back. And something irreversible happened. The neighborhood exhaled. Bumpy did not celebrate. He did not raise his hands. He simply turned and walked away. That restraint mattered. Victory that boasts invites punishment later. At 8:25, the first consequences rippled outward. 2 officers reassigned. A captain transferred quietly. Paper trails reviewed by people who wanted distance, not truth. The betrayer, now isolated, realized the deal he was promised was dissolving. Systems protect themselves first. Always. At 9 o'clock, Harlem moved again. Stores opened late, but opened. Children went to school. Men gathered on corners not to watch for police, but to talk. Something had shifted under the surface. Not power seized, power redistributed. At 9:30, Bumpy sat alone in a borrowed kitchen. Coffee untouched. Hands steady. The adrenaline was gone now. What remained was cost. Isaiah was still in custody. So were others. This was not over. Collapse is loud at first. Then comes cleanup. At 10 o'clock, word spread fast. The raids had stopped. The blank warrants were pulled. Someone higher up had decided this was no longer worth the exposure. That was not justice, but it was retreat, and retreats leave space. Bumpy stood and walked back into the street. People looked at him differently now, not as a shield, not as a myth, but as proof that the old order could crack. Across the city, officials rewrote reports, changed times, softened language. History was already being edited, but Harlem remembered the truth. They always did. By late morning, the immediate danger had passed. The system had blinked. But Bumpy knew better than confuse a blink with mercy. The old order never disappears. It waits, learns, adapts, and somewhere in a holding cell, the man who betrayed his closest friend finally understood the real cost of survival without loyalty. No protection, no honor, no future, just silence. As the sun climbed higher, Harlem settled into a new reality. Not free, not safe, but awake. And once a community wakes up, it never fully goes back to sleep. The collapse had begun. What rose next would define everything. By early afternoon, the adrenaline was gone. What remained was weight, the kind that settles in your chest once the danger passes, and your body realizes what it survived. At 12:15, Bumpy Johnson stood alone in a quiet apartment and listened to the city breathe again. Traffic returned. Voices rose. Life continued. That was the strange part. The city moved on even when the people inside it were forever changed. The cost revealed itself slowly. Not all at once, not loudly. At 12:30, a man knocked on the door. Isaiah's still locked up, he said. No charges, no timeline. Bumpy closed his eyes. That was the system reasserting control. If it could not win publicly, it would punish privately. At 1 o'clock, a woman arrived with a list. Names of people questioned, homes searched, jobs threatened, collateral damage written in ink. Bumpy took the paper and folded it carefully. Every name mattered. Every consequence counted. At 1:30, he visited a mother whose son had not come home. She did not shout. She did not cry. She just asked one question. Was it worth it? Bumpy did not answer right away, because honesty mattered more than comfort. I don't know yet, he said. She nodded. That answer respected her pain. By 2 o'clock, the city outside looked normal again. That was how institutions survived outrage. They waited it out. Let exhaustion do the work violence could not finish. But exhaustion does not erase memory. It only buries it. At 2:15, Bumpy sat on a stoop and watched children jump rope. Their laughter cut through him. This was the reason, not power, not pride, protection. But protection always demanded payment, and the bill never arrived all at once. At 2:45, word reached him quietly. The betrayer had been offered a deal, not freedom, containment, reduced exposure in exchange for silence. That was how the machine corrected mistakes. Not with truth, with management. Bumpy did not react. Anger would change nothing. Understanding would. The system had blinked, yes, but it had not lost its appetite. At 3 o'clock, Isaiah was released. No apology, no explanation, just a warning whisper on the way out. That was mercy by threat, and it made Bumpy's jaw tighten harder than any baton had. At 3:30, a reporter called. Wanted a quote, wanted a face, wanted a story that fit into a clean column. Bumpy declined. Stories flatten people. Harlem did not need flattening. As the afternoon stretched on, Bumpy walked the neighborhood. He did not hide. He did not posture. He listened. People spoke differently now. Less fear, more certainty. They knew the truth even if it would never be printed. That knowledge could not be confiscated. At 4:15, Bumpy stopped at the spot where the boy had been beaten. A chalk outline was gone. The street looked ordinary, but the boy would remember. And memory is a seed of resistance. The price was becoming clear. He would be watched more closely now, forgiven by none, protected by fewer. The system never forgets those who expose it. As evening approached, Bumpy sat alone again. He thought about his friend, about fear, about the moment survival became betrayal. This was the hardest truth. Most injustice is not carried out by monsters, but by frightened men choosing themselves. By sunset, Harlem had returned to its rhythm, but beneath it was something new, not rebellion, awareness. And awareness does not shout. It waits. Bumpy stood at the window as the light faded. He had not won. He had not lost. He had shifted something, and shifts echo, sometimes for generations. Tomorrow, the city would pretend this never happened, but Harlem would remember, and so would he. The price had been paid. The legacy was still being written. Years later, people would argue about what really happened. They would debate dates, motives, who won, who lost. That was inevitable, because when a moment exposes power, power works hard to blur it. But Harlem never needed the argument. Harlem remembered. It was late evening when Bumpy Johnson stood at the edge of the neighborhood and watched the lights come on one by one, not as a king, not as a conqueror, as a man who had survived the truth. The street looked the same, but it was not. The raids never returned the same way. The blank warrants disappeared quietly. The officers who pushed too hard were reassigned or vanished into paperwork. No trials, no apologies. Institutional failure never announces itself. It just retreats and waits for memory to fade. But memory did not fade here. In barbershops, the story stayed alive. In churches, it was spoken carefully. In homes, it was passed down without names, just lessons. That was a legacy, not headlines. Understanding. The betrayer never regained his footing. No protection, no community, no place where his name carried weight. He lived, but he was not alive. That is the quiet punishment systems never warn you about. Survival without belonging. Bumpy carried his own scars, some visible, most not. He had protected Harlem, but protection came with a price. He would always be watched, always whispered about, always one mistake away from erasure. That was the deal power offered men like him. Yet something had changed permanently. The people knew now. They had seen the machine hesitate. They had seen unity interrupt momentum. They had seen that silence, when shared, could be louder than violence. That knowledge could not be confiscated. Justice did not arrive in a courtroom. It arrived in restraint, in neighbors refusing to cooperate with cruelty, in communities deciding that fear was no longer enough. That was moral clarity. Not clean, but real. Bumpy walked those streets for years afterward, not as a myth, as a reminder that dignity does not ask permission. That responsibility weighs more than power. That betrayal can break a man or turn him into a shield. And Harlem carried that lesson forward. Through new battles, new names, new injustices wearing new faces. The city changed, but it never forgot the night it chose itself. If this story stayed with you, that is not an accident. Stories like this survive because people refuse to let them die. So here's the truth, spoken plainly. If you comment, you become part of the record. If you subscribe, you help protect stories power would rather erase. Tell us what moment shook you most. Tell us whose side you would have chosen. Because history is not written by institutions. It is remembered by people. And once remembered, it can never be owned again. Some stories are not entertainment. They are warnings.